welcome everybody to another Bangers and Classics podcast with me, James Ruppert, and him, David Malloy. And what's David been up to this week?
Various things. Nothing of any great significance or import, I'm afraid to say. And worse than that, I've not seen a single classic car of interest this week. It's been an unrelenting and depressing wave after wave of SUVs. So,
Oh no! Well, I've seen an absolute motherload of wonderful cars this week. I've been extremely lucky.
you certainly have. You going to tell us about some of them?
Well, I could do, couldn't I?
I think you should.
There were quite a few minors about. Morris Minor convertible, Morris Minor Traveller, both in very, very good condition, and obviously out for a sort of a Sunday stroll. But they did look very, very good. A very immaculate MGB I saw as well.
Not a GT? Not the
No,
GT?
no, it was a convertible one, and that was in the middle of London. So somebody taking their chances there, which is good. I saw a spectacular Sprite, a racing Austin Healey Sprite being towed behind a motorhome. So they were obviously going up to Snetterton, I should think, for a weekend's racing of some description. And that was quite a magnificent sight, really, to see that. The car was immaculately prepared as well, which was great. Going down the M11 towards the M25, I saw a Chevrolet Bel Air, which I do like. I think it's a very typical 50s shape, but not extreme, is it? It didn't, they hadn't gone too mad with the wings and things. So yeah, and that looked in reasonable condition. And actually, probably the rarest spot I saw was about 10 minutes after seeing the Chevy Bel Air was actually an Audi coupe. So not a Quattro, just a standard Audi coupe. And that, I cannot remember the last time I saw one of those, but it looked rather beautiful. I mean, I know they're sort of very straight edged, but it looked great. And there was a Bentley Turbo charging down the M25 that overtook everybody and most likely got flashed by a camera as it went on its way. I'll sign off here because I know you're getting bored, David. Was a Volvo 340 on the inside lane of the M25, and the thing was, it looked as though it was a genuine daily driver.
Did it have curtains?
It probably did have curtains.
Right. Sorry, I had to interrupt her.
Yeah, that's right. It certainly had cushions on the on the back shelf. But yeah, so well done for them for using it as an everyday car. But so I've seen an awful lot, and probably lots that I've forgotten because I'm so old.
Well, I'd actually forgotten. I did see a car. It must be the MX-5 Owners Club after me. What I saw was an MX-5 with a hardtop that had been lowered to a ridiculous level that basically I was bottoming out just in a normal road. How it copes with sleeping policemen or whatever, I have no idea. I thought, oh dear, well that's them after me. That's a search party's been sent out. But fortunately, I was wearing a beard. I'd ordered a replica of yours from from a fancy dress shop, and basically, so they haven't spotted me yet. I've also got an identification made up with your name on it, so. As long as I don't bump into the 911 Owners Club, I'm safe.
Yeah, I believe they're still after us, but there you go. They can join the queue. All these people.
Yes, it's a long and undistinguished line of people. It has to be said. It's after me.
Yeah,
I don't know about you, James, but I can only speak for myself. There, I'm quite sure you're held in high regard by all.
No, I'm not. No, I've quite often been sacked from things, so that's not good, is it?
I get sacked from working at the British Open once.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yes. When I was a teenager. It's a long story, which I won't bore listeners with. So instead of that, why don't we talk about something else from the 1980s? Yeah. Oh, it's actually almost a good link. So the Vauxhall Nova.
All right.
Is it a classic or is it a banger?
It's got no redeeming features whatsoever, David. But, we haven't talked it through yet. So maybe you could convince me otherwise.
Okay, well, it came along pointing as the Corsa 82. There were some issues, I believe, with trade unions here and didn't come out here till 83. Obviously, if listeners don't know what I'm talking about, they haven't seen one, because there's not many about. There's fewer than 800 on the roads now. Front-wheel drive, boxy, small, it's nimble, fairly basic, super mini. Later versions came along, I think the GTE, then the GSI with a fuel-injected engine. In fact, a friend of mine had one that was a bit more interesting. It was later favoured by boy racers, and it was often seen in the late 80s the late 90s rather, and the noughties, with about 300 weight speakers in the back. The only thing that surprised me is that there wasn't a Burberry edition of it. I sat my driving test in one. It was the Nova Club edition with quite nice stripy seats, and I absolutely hated it. I hated the clutch to such a degree that it was beyond reason. Having said that, I drove one for a certain classic car magazine a few years ago. It was a 10,000 mile car. It was for sale, and took it out into fairly busy traffic. And my opinion of it was transformed. Compared to the cars around me, it was small, yes. It was nimble, it was agile, it was light, it felt perky. It felt like it cut its way through the traffic and made, the likes of modern minis look very, very stodgy indeed. And they felt stodgy in comparison to it. So if you'd asked me this question 5 or 10 years ago, I would say definitely a banger. But I'm going to go the other way now and say that compared to what we've got now, it's a classic. It really is. But what do you think, James?
That's very good to hear. I mean, I just think stylistically, it was a very dull thing to look at. Really, it didn't really have any style to it whatsoever, and it was quite surprising that it was adopted by the youth of this country. But it was, and I think the point you make about how light and fluffy and easy to drive they are compared to today's things, which are twice the weight, they're more difficult to see out of, and they've got lots of complicated things that you don't need in a small car. But yes, you can revel in its basicness. I think so. Yeah, good point made there.
So is banger a classic though? Yeah, I haven't answered the question yet, Mr. Ruppert.
No, it's not. It's a banger, and it'll take a lot of convincing. You will have to take me for a ride in one. I'll expect you to buy one next week and turn up. You can buy one of the remaining 800 ones and turn up and give me a spin in it, and I might change my mind. But at the moment, no, I think it's a sort of a dull, bricky shaped thing.
Yeah, its shape isn't the best part, but I'm going to stick with classic. So it's a split decision. Listeners, if you want to voice an opinion, if you want to side with James or side with me, God help you, then by all means, let us know. We'd love to hear it. And on that note, I think we'll take a very quick breather. If you want to get in touch with either James or I, or find out about some of the other things we've done, then please check out the Bangers and Classics website, www.bangersandclassics.com. Anyway, we'll talk now about something that's a bit more up to date, and that's this business of the imposition, or the introduction rather, of E10 fuel, which I think is coming in September, James, isn't it?
I believe so. Yes. It's a mandated thing. Unfortunately, no one has stood up for the motorists in any way, shape, or form and said, this is a terribly bad idea or an idea that hasn't been thought through terribly well. And it will mean that for certain cars, and you will have to research this yourself, but it's mainly cars from around about 2000 onwards, which are E10 compatible. So older cars, classic cars, bangers and classics, in fact, are going to be the most affected by this. And that's not a terribly good thing. Essentially, it rots your pipes and can damage your engine. And that's not a good thing at all. It's another way of pricing us off the road because we have to buy the more expensive 97 octane petrol. But there you go. It's something that we can do nothing about, and we just have to accept, which is a shame.
Yeah, I mean, it's hygroscopic as well, so it absorbs water, which is not a good thing for fuel to do, let's be honest. You do not want that. It's not just cars that are going to be affected, James. Pretty much anything with a petrol engine. I'm thinking of boats. There's an awful lot of petrol-powered boats out there with older engines, Mercruisers, Volvo Pentas, etc. And again, if you own one of those, get on the blower to your manufacturer and find out if you can use E10 or whether you have to use the more expensive super unleaded and pay the extra tax, because that's really what it is. It's a stealth tax. E10 isn't as efficient as E5. you will use a little bit more fuel for any given journey on average, which I think is counterproductive for a move that's supposed to benefit the environment. And the numbers we're talking about anyway, I just don't see it's a smart move. But we are stuck with it, and that, I'm afraid, is that. As we've said, you have to use, if you've got an older engine, you're going to have to use super unleaded. Now, the government say that'll be available for another 5 years. They've not said what's going to happen after that. So we're stuck with E10, but now is really the time to lobby for the retention of super unleaded at least, so that older cars, classic cars, can continue to be used without suffering engine damage. Other than that, all we can hope for is that additive is brought forward that effectively neutralises the harmful effects of E10 on the internal combustion engine, or the older engines, that is. But to my mind, it's a very, very bad idea. But it's the government, and I say this, the governments of any hue, one thing they do specialise in is bad ideas, and we'll leave it at that. Moving on from that, let's talk about something from the past, which is what we do a lot of anyway. And that's a film that I think is pretty close to your heart, Mr. Ruppert, isn't it? Two Lane Blacktop.
Well, yeah, I think it's relevant to have a look at that or just revisit it, even though actually I haven't seen it for quite a few years, on the basis that there is actually a big franchise film that's out this week, or it was certainly out last week or this week, The Fast and the Furious. And in a way, you can compare and contrast sort of a modern film, which is ostensibly about cars, and compare it to basically a hippie film about cars from 1971. But it's a very interesting film. You may not have heard of it. You may have heard of it. Two Lane Blacktop. It's about sort of illegal road racing in America. Strangely, that was the premise of the original Fast and Furious franchise when it started out. It started out as something sort of quite simple and understandable, and has become rather more complicated and convoluted ever since. I believe the latest one, they're sort of in space at one point, but there you go.
You're kidding me.
Yeah, no, the Critical Drinker actually has reviewed that. I know that you follow him and watch his videos, but yes.
You sure I'm not him?
Well, you may well be, David. It's certainly the drinking part. So
Yeah.
I've heard. But
I'm certainly closer to being him than I am to being Count Dankula. I'll put it that way.
Well, you say that, David. I don't know. You've never been
Yeah.
seen in the same video chat room. So Two Lane Blacktop. If you haven't seen it, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's a sort of a meandering film. Not a great deal happens, but you've got a fantastic actor called Warren Oates who's in it, who's absolutely superb. You've got a GTO in it. In fact, he's called GTO. That's the only way he's referred to. In fact, people actually aren't given names, are they?
No.
In it at all. It's a slightly mysterious film. If you're looking for lots of action and stuff, actually there isn't a lot of action, but it's extremely cool. And from my own point of view, I saw it in 1978, and it sort of made me go and spray my Mini a matte black grey colour. Sort of overnight, I saw that. I thought, wow, that looks fantastic, doesn't it? Having a car in grey primer. Because they've got Chevrolet, haven't they? Car that they use to race other cars, and they would race for Pink Slips, which is basically a V5. Pink Slip sounds more interesting than V5, and they would race and challenge other people, and they just drove a very cool car. There was a mechanic, driver, and you had two people who actually never appeared in a film again. They certainly made music, but it was a sort of a one-off for them. I don't know whether I'm selling this film or not, but James Taylor, I suppose, had the lead role as the sort of pretty driver, and it was Dennis Wilson from the Beach Boys who was the mechanic, and there was a girl there as well, and I think she was just called the girl, wasn't she? I think that's how bad it was. But it's just a slightly deep, interesting film that if you like cars, you will enjoy. And it's just compared to the CGI fest that you get today. It's just a rather remarkable film, and you can go and see it at cinemas. There's a company called Park Circus, and if you go to their website, you can see where it's being put on, so you can actually see it on the big screen. Because this film was a part of the movement of the independent cinema in America at the time, where people just made films with really good scripts and stories, and this was one of them. It just happened to have cars in it, but I don't know. When was the last time you saw it, David?
Oh, a while ago.
Yeah,
Not recently. But yeah, as you say, it's an interesting cast. Obviously, James Taylor and Dennis Wilson, and Warren Oates, who, well, he stole every film he was ever in, as far as I
yeah,
can see. Sadly, passed away, I think, 82 or so, and not at an old age.
no,
If you've ever seen a film called Stripes, he's a sergeant in Stripes. He's very funny in it, but very versatile guy. I might call him a sort of grizzled character actor. That's how I describe him,
yeah,
but very versatile guy. Film itself is it's an example of, I think, of less is more. I mean, there's no CGI. It didn't exist back then. The strength in the story really lies in what's left unsaid by it. Okay, it almost sort of explores the vast open spaces of the soul. And to my mind, it's a kind of Groundhog Day film, but Groundhog Day as it really is for many people. I'm not going to elaborate on that because I want you to see the film. You may agree with me, you may disagree, and that's both is absolutely fine. Whatever you want to do is fine. But it's a really, really good movie. It's a very cool movie. It's a movie I think I said this on Twitter. Watch it at night, turn the lights out, pour yourself a Scotch in the box. You can, or whatever other drinks your portion. Glass of milk if that's your thing. Turn the lights out, watch it alone. Just let yourself become immersed in it and experience it. And that's how to get the best from it. You might get really what the film director was trying to accomplish with it. You can watch Fast and Furious, I think it's the ninth version now, and you might be entertained by watching it. Personally, I don't really care for them, but you might find them entertaining. But when you leave the cinema, that's it. There's nothing lasting. This, on the other hand, is a kind of film that you might end up thinking about sometimes just when you're wandering around. That, to me, is what a film should be about. If you want a more deep experience, and in that, I think we'll take a break. You're listening to the Bangers and Classics podcast with our very own sharp-dressed man, James Ruppert, and David Malloy. So from the roads of California, we're going to head now to somewhere a little bit more familiar to people in the UK, and that's Slough. Because Citroën used to have a factory there, James. Do you know the story of that?
they do, or they did, and I would have thought the best person to tell me that story is you.
I wouldn't say that, but I'll have a
No,
go.
yeah,
Well, basically what happened was, during World War One, the government imposed taxes on customs duties on the importation of luxury goods, which included cars, and they were called the McKenna duties. And the reason for that was to fund the war effort, or to help fund it anyway. However, when the war stopped, guess what? The taxes stayed. And although they were briefly repealed in 1924, they were reimposed in 1925, quelle surprise, and they lasted for another 30 years. Now, if we spin forward to the mid 1920s, Citroën were doing rather well in the UK. They were selling about 25,000 cars a year, which is a fair number for the time. And they had a UK base at Hammersmith that dealt with the importation and the distribution of the cars. But they thought, well, we're paying taxes to import our cars that we're selling here. Why don't we build some here? So they built a factory in Slough. It was at the Slough Trading Estate, opened in 1926, and it produced, James, some great cars, the Traction Apple, the 2CV, the DS, and the AMI 6. It also produced a car that was unique to the UK. It was based in the 2CV. Can you guess which one it was?
was that the Bijou?
Oh, well played, sir.
Oh,
It
there you
was
go.
indeed. It was a fiberglass bodied coupe that was based in a 2CV chassis, and its claim to fame was it was styled by a chap called Peter Kerwin Taylor, who also styled the original Lotus Elite from 1957. Unfortunately, the Bijou, which was designed for the UK market, just didn't find a following here, and it was very quickly pulled from the market. And shortly after that, the Citroën factory at Slough closed as well. Some of the buildings were then taken over by Mars, the confectionery company. But as I say, if you go there now looking for traces of Citroën, sadly, you're not going to find it. But it is true to say that for a time they actually had a factory here and they built some very interesting cars here, and it all came around because of government taxation. And I wonder where I've heard that story before. Hey, James.
Well, there you go. Absolutely. There's, there may be a gold wing car, that you may have mentioned before on these podcasts. I don't know.
Oh, that one, yes, the Bricklin.
Yeah, yeah, that's it.
Well, that's another story. Yeah, the Bricklin. We can do that sometime about what they might call Canada's DeLorean. A friend of yours owns one. What am I
He
talking about?
absolutely, yeah, yeah. Old George went that extra mile. I know he put it up for sale recently. I can't remember whether it's sold or not, but
Well, we
we'll
shall
have
have
to
to find out.
look into that. Yeah, I'll
Mm.
ask him. But yeah, but I mean, that was obviously the only one in the country. But what a magnificent car to buy and own, for however long a period. I can't think of anything better.
Yeah, it was marketed as a safety vehicle.
Mm.
It was only available in very bright, so almost lurid colours, powered by a big V8 engine, gull-wing doors. I don't think it's as pretty as a DeLorean, I have to be honest and say, but it certainly makes an impression, that's for sure. And if you're lucky enough to get a shot of one or see one, take your time and savour it, because as James says, there's very few in the country. I mean, George may have the only one. I think there were one
Oh,
smaller than that. But
mm.
cars come and cars go, and that's just how it is. So, the final section of this week's podcast, I'd like to talk about older cars and safety, James. Now, obviously, older cars are something that are very close to both of our hearts. Um, it's true that they're lighter. It's true that they're not as strongly built, but does that necessarily make them more dangerous than modern cars?
I don't think it does. I think in many ways, those of us who use older cars on a daily basis, and I do. So even if I'm traveling a couple of hundred miles, I'll still take the BMW. Um, I don't feel any less safe in one. But I tell you what, I'm very very aware of everything. I'm very very aware of stopping distances. I'm very very aware of other cars and what they're doing. And I think I drive a lot more defensively. It's something that anybody who rides a motorbike will tell you, that if you want to live, because there's no protection whatsoever, you really do have to think, that the person in front of you is going to do something stupid, someone behind you is going to do something stupid. And I think you are just very aware of things. And I also think older car owners like us and most of our listeners are very aware of stopping distances and just what the car will do or not do. And if you're aware of all those things, I actually think that probably makes you 100% safer than someone who's just driving along in something which is going to wrap them up in cotton wool if they fall off the road because they're on their phone. But I could be wrong.
Hmm. Well, may I quote Dirty Harry and Magnum Force here? I won't do I won't do my Clint Eastwood impersonation. I
Oh, that's
won't
a
inflict
shame.
that.
I was looking
No,
forward to
no, I'm not doing that
that.
today. Uh, but he says a man's got to know his limitations. Well, basically, you've got to know your limitations and those of the car and drive within them. What I say about older cars, and I'm going back to the story about the Nova we did earlier. In driving that car, I felt that it was more responsive. It handled it, changed direction with greater alacrity. I could, get out of trouble if I get into it. If somebody was coming towards me, it was nimble enough, it was agile enough, and responsive enough for me to be able to, avoid trouble. Obviously, if the car was struck, then it is flimsier, and yeah, I am going to be hurt. So that's one thing. I think the dynamic safety element of older cars can be greater, simply because in many respects they get better. They're more agile, they're lighter, and in some respects the engines are more responsive. James mentioned about driving within limits and knowing what your car can do. Well, I'll give you an example of that. If you look at Formula One, um, and nowadays it can be like bumper cars or dodgems at times, but in the classic years of Formula One, you wouldn't get that kind of behaviour because drivers knew that if they collided with other people, they were putting their life and the other driver's life, and possibly people at trackside's lives, at risk as well. And for that reason, those sort of accidents didn't really happen. Driving was much cleaner. Trouble is, people think sometimes it's because even you can call it the Titanic. You can call this the Titanic theory. That if people think the cars are indestructible or they can go around a corner at a certain speed, no problem at all, then they'll delude themselves into doing that. They'll drive a certain way. Whereas if you're aware that your car is fragile, that it can't take the bend beyond a certain speed with any guarantee that you're going to get to the other end of it, then you will drive accordingly. You will drive within the limits yourself, within the limits of your car, and ipso facto, you're going to be a safer driver. There is something to be said for older cars in that sense. They instill a sense of mortality in the driver, and that's not a bad thing, I don't think. In fact, I'd say that's a good thing. It would be a fallacy just to say that an older car is, in every respect, more dangerous than a modern one. I think there are good and bad elements to both of them. James?
No, absolutely. It's all about the nut behind the wheel, isn't it? Really,
Yeah,
essentially.
the biggest nut of all, that's the problem.
Yeah.
Obviously, I have to go out and buy more disguises just in case the MX5 Owners Club have rumbled that last one I was wearing. And you never know, 911 boys might yet take a pop at us, James.
Well, they could do, couldn't they? But and
They
they'd be
could.
perfectly entitled to do that as well. It's a
Yes, well, anyway, I'm sure the 911 Owners Club are very reasonable chaps. And to be honest, they're too busy extricating themselves from bushes that they've gone into backwards to be bothered with the likes of you and me anyway. And on that note, I'll say thanks for listening. Hope to see you next time.
yeah. I'll see you next time. I'm just off to race David for his pink slip.